The bell for morning prayers rang out, a clear, pure sound that cut through the misty air surrounding the old convent. For the women inside, it was the start of another day, a day that would be almost exactly like the one before, and the one before that. This was the life they had chosen, a life of rhythm and routine, of service and prayer. And for one woman in particular, Sister Agnes, this predictable quiet was a comfort, a blanket she had wrapped around herself for many years. She moved from her simple cot to the chapel, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the cold stone floors. Her habit, a simple black and white, was a part of her, a second skin that announced her purpose to the world without her ever having to say a word to anyone who saw her. Sister Agnes was the picture of a devoted nun. She was not the youngest nor the oldest, somewhere in that quiet middle of life where the fires of youth have cooled, but the wisdom of age is still being gathered. Her face was kind, with gentle lines around her eyes that deepened when she offered a rare, soft smile. She spent her mornings in the chapel, her lips moving silently in prayer, her hands clasped tightly. She spent her afternoons in the garden, her fingers working the soil with the same care she gave to her prayers. The garden was her small corner of the world, a place where she could coax life from the earth, tending to the roses and the vegetables that fed the small community. The other sisters saw her as reliable, as steady, as someone who had found a deep peace in her faith. They saw her goodness, but they did not see the whole picture. They saw the calm surface of the water, but not the strong, hidden current running deep beneath. There was a part of Sister Agnes that she kept locked away, a part she had carefully placed in a box and buried deep inside herself the day she took her vows. It was a part of her that sometimes stirred, like a ghost in the quiet of the night. This ghost had a sound, a feeling, and it was connected to a large, forgotten object that sat in the corner of the community hall. The hall was a large echoing room used for gatherings, for meetings, and for simple meals on feast days. And in its far corner, shrouded in a white cloth that was now yellowed with a fine layer of dust, stood a grand piano. It had been a gift, many years ago, from a wealthy family whose daughter had once attended the convent school. It was a beautiful instrument once. Its wood was a deep, glossy black, and its ivory keys were smooth and inviting. But now it was just a piece of furniture, a silent giant that gathered dust and memories. Occasionally, one of the younger sisters, who had had a few lessons as a child, would sit down and plink out a simple, slightly off-key hymn. But for the most part, it was ignored. It was too big, too loud, too worldly for the quiet life of the convent. Sister Agnes could never ignore it. Every time she walked through the hall to fetch supplies or to set up chairs for a meeting, she felt its presence. It was as if it was calling to her, a low, silent hum that only she could hear. Sometimes, when the hall was empty, she would stop. She would stand there for a long moment, her hands hidden in the wide sleeves of her habit, and just look at it. She would remember the feel of different keys, keys that were worn smooth not by dust, but by hours of passionate playing. She would remember the weight of a different kind of life, a life filled with roaring applause and bright stage lights, a life that felt like a dream belonging to someone else. One afternoon, she was cleaning the hall, sweeping the stone floor with a stiff broom. The rhythmic swish was the only sound. The sun streamed through the high, arched windows, illuminating the millions of dust motes dancing in the air like tiny fairies. Her work brought her closer and closer to the corner, to the shrouded piano. She stopped sweeping and leaned the broom against the wall. The silence in the room suddenly felt heavier, thicker. She took a slow step towards it, then another. Her heart was beating a little faster, a familiar flutter she hadn't felt in a long time. She reached out a hand, her fingers trembling slightly. She didn't touch the cloth, but held her hand just above it, as if feeling the heat coming off a hidden fire. In her mind she saw a flash of a memory. A room full of people, all dressed in their finest clothes. The scent of perfume and wine in the air. The heavy velvet of a dress she once wore. And the feeling of the keys under her fingers, not as a memory, but as a real, physical sensation. She could almost feel the music building inside her, a complex and powerful storm of notes and emotions that demanded to be let out. Her fingers ached to press down, to release the sound that was trapped inside the wooden shell. Then another sound broke the spell. The sound of footsteps in the hallway. Sister Agnes snatched her hand back as if she had been burned. She quickly turned, grabbed her broom, and began sweeping again, her movements a little too fast, a little too frantic. A young sister entered the hall, smiling brightly. "Sister Agnes? Mother Superior was looking for you? She needs help in the kitchen." The young nun's voice was cheerful and completely unaware of the storm that had just been raging in the quiet room. "Of course," Sister Agnes said, her own voice steady and calm, betraying nothing. She gave the young woman a soft smile and walked towards the door, her back straight. As she left the hall, she did not look back at the piano, but she could feel it behind her, a silent witness to the secret she still carried, a reminder of the life she had left behind and the music she had promised to silence. And for a brief, painful moment, she wondered if a promise made to God could truly quiet a song that was written on your very soul. The trouble started with the rain. It wasn't a gentle, cleansing rain that makes the gardens glow, but a cold, persistent drizzle that seeped into the old stone walls of the convent. For a week it fell without stopping, and soon a dark, damp stain appeared on the ceiling of the chapel right above the altar. Then a drop of water fell, plinking softly into a bucket the sisters had placed there. The sound, a quiet asterisk plink, plink, plink. Asterisk became a terrible heartbeat counting down to a disaster they couldn't afford. The Mother Superior, a woman whose face usually held a calm serenity, now wore a mask of deep worry. She had called a meeting and the sisters sat in the community hall, their usual quiet chatter replaced by a heavy silence. "The news is not good," the Mother Superior began, her voice strained. "The estimate for the roof is more than we have." "Much more," she paused, looking at the worried faces of her small family. "And with the city cutting funds for the school, well, you all understand what this means. We are facing a very real possibility of having to close our doors." A collective gasp went through the room. This place was their home, their life's work, their sanctuary. The thought of losing it was too much to bear. For a few moments no one spoke. They just sat with the weight of her words, the sound of the rain outside a miserable reminder of their crumbling world. It was Sister Agnes who finally broke the silence, not with a grand idea, but with a simple, quiet question. "Is there nothing we can do?" Her voice seemed to give the Mother Superior a small spark of strength. "There is one hope," she said, her voice a little firmer now. "It is a long shot, but it is a hope. We will hold a fundraising gala, a big one. We will invite the patrons from the town, the wealthy families who have supported us in the past. And, we have a special performer." A murmur of curiosity rippled through the sisters. "A performer? Here?" The Mother Superior took a deep breath. "Through the grace of God and a generous connection, we have managed to secure a performance from the famous pianist, Julian Vance." The name hung in the air. Even the sisters who lived a life separate from the world had heard of Julian Vance. He was a superstar, a virtuoso known as much for his breathtaking talent as for his sharp temper and arrogant attitude. They had seen him on television, his dark hair falling over his eyes as his hands flew across the keys, commanding the piano like a king commanding his court. He was a man of the world, a celebrity. The idea of him coming to their quiet, humble convent was almost unbelievable. The day he arrived for a site visit, the contrast was jarring. A sleek black car, so shiny it looked like a piece of the night sky, pulled up the gravel driveway, crunching the stones in a way that sounded impatient. Out stepped Julian Vance. He wore a tailored coat that probably cost more than their entire kitchen budget, and a scarf was draped artfully around his neck. He looked around at the old buildings, the simple gardens, and the gentle-faced nuns gathered to greet him with an expression of mild boredom, as if he were visiting a museum that had failed to impress. He followed the Mother Superior into the community hall, his expensive shoes making loud, clomping sounds on the wooden floor. His eyes scanned the room, his lip curled in a slight sneer. "Charming," he said, the word dripping with sarcasm. "Very rustic." His gaze fell upon the grand piano in the corner. He walked towards it, running a disdainful finger along the dusty lid. "And you expect me to perform on this?" he asked, turning to the Mother Superior with a look of disbelief. "This is an antique, a relic. It hasn't been tuned in a decade, I'd wager. The action will be sluggish, the tone will be dead. It's an insult to the music." The Mother Superior's face tightened, but she kept her voice polite. "It is the piano we have, Mr. Vance. It has served us well over the years." "Served you well for plinking out hymns, perhaps?" he scoffed. "But not for a real performance. I'll have my technician bring my own instrument. I can't be associated with this kind of amateurism." He pulled out his phone, turning his back on the Mother Superior as he began to pace, speaking loudly into his phone about another, more important engagement. As he walked back and forth, a sound began to drift from the far side of the hall. It was faint at first, but then it grew stronger. It was the sound of a piano, but it wasn't a simple hymn. It was a piece of music so complex, so full of fire and passion, it seemed to make the very air in the room vibrate. The notes cascaded and tumbled over one another, a torrent of sound that was both technically brilliant and deeply emotional. It was a storm of sadness and joy, a story told in melody. Julian stopped pacing. He lowered his phone, his arrogant expression replaced by one of confusion. The music was stunning. It was the kind of playing that made you stop everything you were doing and just listen. It was better than good. It was extraordinary. Who on earth was playing? He had assumed their only organist was a sweet old woman who could manage a few basic chords. He followed the sound, his footsteps now silent on the floor. He moved towards a small practice room off the main hall, the door slightly ajar. He peeked inside. And there, at a small upright piano, sat a nun. Her back was to him, her simple black habit a stark contrast to the passionate energy coming from the piano. Her body swayed slightly with the music, and her hands, those hands that he had seen folded in prayer or tending to plants, moved across the keys with a speed and a grace that was almost unbelievable. She was not just playing the notes. She was living them, breathing them. She was completely lost in the music, a world away from the quiet. Humble woman who tended the convent's garden, Julian stood there, mesmerized, his professional ego momentarily forgotten. He was listening to a master, a true once-in-a-generation talent. He tried to place the style, the technique. It was unlike anything he had heard. It had the power of the great Russian composers, but with a soulfulness, a depth of feeling. That was entirely unique. The music reached a powerful, crashing crescendo, and then it softened into a few final, heartbreaking notes. As the last sound faded into silence, the nun seemed to remember where she was. Her shoulders tensed. She sensed she was not alone. She turned her head and her eyes met his. In an instant, the magic was broken. The passionate virtuoso vanished, and in her place was the shy, flustered Sister Agnes, her face flushed a deep red. And she quickly pulled her hands back from the keys as if they had been burned. Julian's face hardened again. The arrogance rushed back in, a shield protecting his ego from the confusion he had just felt. He couldn't reconcile the two images. The nun in her plain habit, playing with the soul of a genius. It didn't fit into his neat, orderly world where celebrities like him were special and people like her were not. So he forced the experience into a box he could understand. A box labeled hobby. He leaned against the doorframe, a condescending smile spreading across his face. "A little hobby, sister?" he said, his voice laced with a smug superiority. "That's quite nice. It's good to have a pastime." He didn't wait for a reply. He just turned and walked away, already dismissing what he had heard. He had underestimated her completely, tucking away the memory of that breathtaking performance as a quaint little oddity, a curious footnote in his otherwise important day. He had no idea that the quiet woman he had just insulted held a power that could change everything. The night of the gala arrived with a sense of fragile hope, like a single candle flame fighting against a strong wind. The old community hall, usually a place of quiet, echoing footsteps, was transformed. The sisters had spent the entire day polishing the worn wooden floors until they shone. hanging simple but elegant garlands of greenery from the high arches, and placing candles in every available nook, their warm light dancing on the stone walls. The grand piano, the one Julian Vance had dismissed, now stood center stage, cleaned and polished until it gleamed under the soft lights. It looked like a sleeping beast waiting to be awakened. The air, which usually smelled of old books and beeswax, was now a strange mix of convent calm and expensive perfume. Sister Agnes felt like a ghost in her own home. She moved through the crowds of guests, a tray of small glasses in her hands, her simple habit a stark contrast to the silks and jewels of the town's elite. These were people who lived in a world of stock markets and country clubs, a world she had left behind long ago. She watched them laugh, their voices loud and confident, and she felt a vast distance between their lives and hers. She was there to serve, to refill glasses and clear away empty plates, to be a part of the background, and that was fine with her. It was safer in the background. Every now and then her eyes would drift to the piano on the stage, and a familiar knot of longing and fear would tighten in her stomach. She prayed for the success of the evening, for the roof, for the school. But she also prayed that she could remain invisible, that no one would look at her and see the ghost of the person she used to be. The Mother Superior was the picture of grace, greeting each guest with a warm, welcoming smile, though her hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She was the conductor of this orchestra of hope, and she was desperately waiting for her star performer to arrive. The scheduled time came and went. Then another 15 minutes passed. The murmur in the crowd began to change from polite chatter to questioning whispers. The Mother Superior's smile became more strained with each passing minute. Finally, just when the tension was becoming unbearable, a sleek black car pulled up to the entrance. Julian Vance swept in, not with an apology, but with an air of annoyance, as if their humble convent had personally inconvenienced him. He wore a dark, expensive suit and his famous scowl. He brushed past the Mother Superior without a proper greeting. "Where's my dressing room? I need to prepare." "The acoustics in these old places are always a nightmare," he complained, his voice carrying across the now silent hall. A young, nervous sister showed him to a small room off the main hall. He slammed the door behind him. For the next half hour, the guests sipped their drinks and made awkward small talk, all while being very aware of the temperamental artist sequestered in the back. The Mother Superior tried to smooth things over, circulating among the patrons and sharing stories of the children at the school, painting a picture of the good their donations could do. Slowly, the mood began to lift again. The music was coming. The hope was still alive. Then the door to the dressing room flew open and Julian Vance stormed out, his face a thundercloud. He strode directly to the Mother Superior, who was speaking with a particularly wealthy-looking couple. "This is unacceptable," he hissed, his voice low but furious. "Absolutely unacceptable." The Mother Superior turned to him, her heart sinking. "Mr. Vance? What is the matter?" "The matter?" he said, his voice rising so that nearby guests turned to stare. "The matter is that I was just served a glass of water." "In a plastic cup?" "A plastic cup. Do you have any idea how insulting that is? I am an artist, not a factory worker. This entire event is a farce. A cheap, amateurish farce." The Mother Superior was taken aback. She looked over at the young sister who had served him, who was now standing by the wall, her face pale with fright and shame. "Mr. Vance," the Mother Superior said, her voice now firm with a quiet steel, "that sister is a member of our community. She has given her life to service and to God. She offered you water with kindness. It is not the cup that matters, but the spirit in which it is given." Vance laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "The spirit? You can't pay for a new roof with spirit, can you? You need me. You need my talent. And you have insulted it." He looked around at the stunned guests, a dramatic flair to his movements. "I came here tonight as a favor, but I will not be disrespected. Find someone else to save your little project." And with that, he turned on his heel and marched out of the hall, the heavy front door slamming shut behind him with a final Deafening boom, the silence that followed was worse than any noise. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket of despair. The guests looked at each other, their faces a mixture of shock and awkward pity. The main event, the reason they had all come and opened their wallets, was gone. A few people began to quietly put on their coats. The dream was over. The Mother Superior stood frozen in the middle of the floor, her face ashen. All the months of planning, all the hope, had just walked out the door, and a fit of ego-panic began to ripple through the sisters. They saw the future they feared so much becoming a reality in that very moment. In the chaos, a young nun, the same one who had been so frightened by Vance's anger, rushed to the Mother Superior's side. "What will we do?" she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. The Mother Superior could only shake her head, her vision blurring. But Sister Agnes can play," the young nun said suddenly, her voice a desperate whisper. "I've heard her. Late at night, in the practice room. She can play better than he can. Much better." Another sister who overheard looked skeptical. "Sister Agnes? She plays the old hymns for the children's choir. She is very sweet, but—" "No," the young nun insisted, her voice gaining a little strength. "It's not like that. It's like magic." The Mother Superior barely heard them. Her eyes scanned the room, past the departing guests, past the empty stage, and landed on Sister Agnes. She was standing by a table, quietly collecting empty glasses, her face a mask of calm sorrow as she watched her world fall apart. The Mother Superior thought of Vance's cruel comment about her little hobby. A crazy, impossible thought began to form in her mind, a seed of desperation sprouting into a wild, desperate plan. It was a long shot. It was a risk. But it was the only shot they had left. She walked through the thinning crowd, her steps slow and deliberate. She reached Sister Agnes's side and gently placed a hand on her arm. Agnes turned, her kind eyes filled with a question. The Mother Superior looked into her eyes, searching for something she had never thought to look for before. She saw the quiet devotion, the gentle soul, but underneath it she thought she saw something else. A flicker, a depth. A hidden ocean. The room was getting emptier by the second. The music had died before it even began. The Mother Superior took a deep breath, her voice trembling as she spoke the words that would change everything. "Agnes," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "we need a miracle. Can you provide one?" The Mother Superior's words hung in the air, fragile and desperate. "We need a miracle. Can you provide one?" Sister Agnes looked at the woman who was her leader, her guide, her spiritual mother, and saw not just the worry for the roof or the school, but a profound, bone-deep fear for their entire way of life. She saw the faces of the other sisters, their hope draining away with every guest who put on their coat to leave. In that moment, the quiet life she had so carefully built for herself felt like a selfish luxury. The box where she had locked away her past, her music, her very soul, suddenly felt like a coffin. Something had to be done. She didn't answer with words. She simply gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Then she turned and began walking towards the stage. Each step felt like a lifetime. The soft solace of her shoes were silent on the polished wood, but in her head, every footstep was a thunderclap. The few remaining guests turned to look. A murmur of confusion rippled through the room. "Who is that? Is she part of the staff? Is there going to be an announcement?" They saw only a nun, a woman of quiet service, walking towards a grand piano as if she were about to dust it, not play it. Some looked on with pity, others with a kind of condescending curiosity. They had paid to see a superstar, and instead they were getting this. Sister Agnes felt their eyes on her, 100 tiny judgments. She felt the weight of her habit, the symbol of her vow to be humble, to be invisible. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to retreat into the safety of the shadows. But she kept walking. She reached the stage and climbed the 3 small steps, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She sat on the bench, the worn velvet cool beneath her. The piano, the one Julian Vance had called a relic, stood before her, majestic and waiting. For a long moment she just sat there, her hands resting in her lap, her eyes closed. The room was so quiet she could hear the rain beginning to fall again outside. A soft, sad drumming against the windows, then she placed her hands on the keys. They were cool and smooth, and the feeling was so familiar it was painful. It was like meeting an old friend you had once betrayed. Her fingers, which knew the texture of soil and the roughness of a rosary, now remembered the ivory keys as if no time had passed at all. She took a deep breath, and she began to play. The first notes were simple, almost hesitant. A quiet, questioning melody that seemed to float in the air like a lone bird in a vast, empty sky. The audience shifted in their seats. This was not what they expected. It was gentle, sad, but undeniably beautiful. A few people stopped whispering and leaned forward, their curiosity piqued. The melody began to grow, to branch out. It was like watching a tree grow in fast motion, a single note sprouting leaves and then branches, each one more complex and lovely than the last. The music was telling a story of a young girl with a dream, a story of long hours in a practice room while the world outside went on without her. Then the music changed. A new theme entered, one that was full of conflict and passion. The notes came faster, a torrent of sound that was both thrilling and terrifying. It was the sound of a heart torn in two, the sound of a choice between a great love and a great calling. The music swelled, filling every corner of the hall, chasing away the shadows and the scent of expensive perfume. It was a storm of sound, and the audience was caught in it. A cynical music critic in the back row, who had come ready to write a scathing review, found his pen frozen above his notepad. He had never heard anything like it. The technique was flawless, but it was the emotion, the raw, naked feeling pouring out of the piano that was truly staggering. In the back of the hall, standing in the shadows by the door, was Julian Vance. He had returned in a huff, having realized he'd left his expensive leather gloves in the dressing room. He was ready to make another dramatic exit, but the sound of the piano stopped him cold. At first he was annoyed. They found some student to play? He thought with a sneer. But as he listened, his sneer faded. He recognized the style, the unique phrasing, the impossible depth of feeling. It was the same music he had heard coming from the practice room, the music he had dismissed as a hobby. But hearing it now, in the full acoustics of the hall, played on the very instrument he had scorned, he was forced to confront the truth. This wasn't a hobby. This was genius. Pure, unadulterated genius. He watched the small woman in the simple habit, her body swaying with the music, her face a mask of concentration and sorrow, and he felt a wave of humiliation so profound it made him physically sick. He, the great Julian Vance, had insulted a master. He had walked out on a performance that was 1,000 times more real, more powerful, than anything he could ever hope to create. The music on stage reached its peak. It was a cataclysm of sound and emotion, a climax that spoke of sacrifice, of loss, of a love so great it demanded everything. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the storm passed. The music softened, returning to the simple, haunting melody from the beginning. But now it was different. It was no longer just sad. It was filled with a profound sense of peace, of acceptance. It was the sound of a soul that had found its home. The final notes hung in the air, shimmering and pure, and then faded into a silence so complete it was sacred. No one moved. No one clapped. No one breathed. The entire room was held captive by the ghost of the music. It was as if they had all been taken on a journey and had only just returned. Sister Agnes sat at the piano, her hands still resting on the keys, her head bowed. She was not a performer waiting for applause. She was a conduit who had poured out everything she had and was now empty. Then a single person began to clap. It was an old man in the front row, a retired music teacher. He got to his feet, his hands beating together in a steady, rhythmic tribute. Slowly, another person joined in. Then another. Within seconds, the entire room erupted. It wasn't just polite applause. It was a roar. A standing ovation that shook the old stone walls. People were cheering, whistling, many with tears streaming down their faces. They were not just applauding a performance. They were acknowledging a miracle. The wealthy patrons, the cynical critics, the curious onlookers, they were all one in their awe. They had come expecting an evening of entertainment, but they had received something far more precious. They had witnessed a truth. And in that moment, looking at the humble woman at the piano, they understood that greatness could be found in the most unexpected of places, and that sometimes the quietest souls hold the most powerful songs. The roar of the crowd was a physical thing, a warm wave that washed over the stage and filled every corner of the old hall. But for Sister Agnes, it was a sound from a distant world. She sat at the piano, her head still bowed, her fingers resting lightly on the keys that had just unleashed a storm. The applause was not for her, she thought. It was for the music, for the story it had told. She felt a profound sense of emptiness, as if she had poured out every drop of emotion she had ever stored, leaving nothing behind but a quiet, hollow vessel. The lights felt too bright, the stares of the crowd too heavy. Her first, strongest instinct was to flee, to run back to the quiet safety of her small room and the familiar rhythm of prayer. The Mother Superior was the first to reach the stage. She didn't say anything at first, simply placed a gentle hand on Sister Agnes's shoulder. The touch was an anchor in a sea of overwhelming sensation. Slowly Agnes looked up. The Mother Superior's eyes were shining, not with the tears of sorrow she had worn earlier, but with a bright, fierce pride. She helped Agnes to her feet, and the applause, which had been starting to fade, surged again, louder this time. People were standing on their chairs, their faces alight with a kind of joyous disbelief. They weren't just clapping for a performance. They were celebrating a revelation. Wealthy patrons, people who usually moved in circles of power and influence, now crowded towards the stage, their faces eager. They wanted to touch her, to thank her, to say something, anything, to the quiet woman who had moved them so deeply. A man in a tailored suit, who owned half the factories in the town, had tears in his eyes. "Sister," he said, his voice thick with emotion. That was a gift from God." Sister Agnes didn't know what to say. She just offered a small, shy smile and nodded, her hands clasped together in a gesture of prayer, a way to shield herself from the intensity of their attention. She was not a performer who basked in the glow of the spotlight. She was a servant who had been asked to do a job, and now that the job was done, she longed for the shadows. In the back of the hall, Julian Vance stood frozen, a solitary figure in the swirling chaos. The clapping and cheering felt like accusations, each hand clap a judgment against his own arrogance. He saw the faces of the people he had dismissed, the simple nuns he had scorned, and he felt a shame so deep it was like a sickness. He had come here to be a savior, a God descending from the heavens to rescue the poor with his talent. Instead, he had witnessed a true miracle, performed by a woman he had deemed beneath his notice. He had seen the face of real artistry, and it was humble, and it was holy, and it had nothing to do with fame or expensive suits. Without a word, he turned and slipped out a side door, the sound of the ovation following him like a ghost into the rainy night. The days that followed were a blur. The story of the piano nun spread through the town like wildfire. It wasn't just a local curiosity. Newspapers from the city sent reporters. The convent's small, old-fashioned telephone rang off the hook. Everyone wanted an interview with Sister Agnes, but she refused them all. "The music was the message," she told the Mother Superior quietly. "I am just the messenger." The messenger does not need to be seen. Instead of giving interviews, she went back to her garden. She went back to her prayers. She returned to her life of quiet service, as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. The change was most visible in the convent's bank account. The donations that poured in after the gala were more than enough to fix the roof. They were enough to repair the crumbling walls, to install a new heating system, and to buy new books for the school. The money was a blessing, a direct answer to their prayers, but the Mother Superior was wise. She knew that money alone could not be the only legacy of that night. A few weeks after the gala, a truck arrived at the convent. It was a piano technician's truck, the best in the region. And the man who stepped out of it was Julian Vance. He looked different. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet humility. He carried his own tools and asked to see the piano he had once insulted. He spent 2 days working on it, his hands moving with a new kind of reverence. He tuned it, regulated its action, and polished its wood until it shone like a mirror. He did not ask for payment. When he was finished, he found Sister Agnes in the garden, tending to her roses. "It is ready," he said, his voice soft. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "It is a fine instrument. It deserved better than the treatment I gave it." Sister Agnes stopped her work and looked at him. She saw not the famous virtuoso, but a man who was lost, searching for something. "The instrument is just wood and strings, Mr. Vance," she said gently. "It is the heart that plays it that matters." He just nodded, a look of profound gratitude on his face, and left without another word. The most important change, however, was the one that happened inside the convent walls. With the extra funds, the Mother Superior did something unexpected. She established a music program. The old, dusty piano was moved from the hall to a large, sunny room that was once used for storage. It was no longer a relic. It was the heart of a new life. And Sister Agnes was asked to be its teacher. At first, she was hesitant. "My music was from a different life," she argued. "It was a life of pride, of seeking applause." "Then use it for a different purpose now," the Mother Superior replied. "Use it to teach, to give joy, to show the children the beauty that can be found in discipline and dedication. Your gift was not taken from you when you took your vows, Agnes. It was given a new direction." So Sister Agnes began to teach. She taught the children from the school and even some of the younger nuns. Her classroom was a place of quiet magic. She was a patient and gentle teacher. She didn't just teach them how to read notes or press keys. She taught them how to feel the music, how to tell a story with sound. She would sit with a small child, her hand guiding theirs over the keys, and her face would light up with the same passion that had captivated the audience at the gala. She had finally found a way to merge the two halves of her life, the woman of the world and the woman of God. Her music was no longer a secret to be hidden or a performance to be judged. It was a prayer. It was an act of love. And in that small, sunny room, surrounded by the bright, hopeful faces of her students, Sister Agnes was more at peace than she had ever been. The performance had changed everything, not by making her a star, but by allowing her to become, finally, whole.